Some people feel strangely intimidated around INFJs, though they'll never say it out loud. It's not because INFJs are loud, forceful, or demanding. They aren't. It's because their presence carries a depth most people aren't used to. Their silence isn't empty, it's observant. Their calmness isn't passive, it's grounded. Their intuition cuts through masks, excuses, and surface level charm in seconds. Being around an INFJ feels like standing in front of someone who sees more than you're used to being seen, someone who notices what you avoid, someone who feels what you hide. And for many people, that quiet insight creates an uncomfortable, shrinking feeling, not because the INFJ makes them small, but because they suddenly realize how shallow their own emotional world is by comparison. People don't admit it, but INFJs awaken insecurities. Their emotional maturity exposes emotional avoidance. Their compassion highlights selfishness. Their authenticity makes pretense look cheap. And their intuition, it disarms people who live behind masks. The INFJ doesn't even need to speak. Their eyes already read the whole story. Those with unresolved wounds, hidden motives, or fragile egos feel exposed in the presence of someone who can sense more than most can see. So instead of acknowledging the discomfort, they label the INFJ as intense, mysterious, hard to read, or too deep. But the truth is simpler. The INFJ reflects parts of people they'd rather not face. Now let me ask you something that only self-awareness minds will understand. Have you ever noticed how your presence changes the room, even when you say nothing? If you watched to the end, comment, "My presence speaks," so I know you're one of the INFJs who understands this effect. And don't forget to subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your depth, intuition, and quiet power are finally understood. INFJs see through masks instantly, making people feel exposed even when nothing is said. INFJs possess a rare perceptiveness that unsettles people more than they realize. They don't need long conversations, emotional confessions, or dramatic displays to understand someone. They pick up on micro-expressions, tone shifts, energy changes, and inconsistencies in seconds. They see the sadness behind a smile, the insecurity behind arrogance, the fear behind anger, and the loneliness behind attachment. And because they notice what most people hide, often unintentionally, others feel strangely exposed in their presence. An INFJ's gaze alone can feel like a quiet mirror, reflecting truths people aren't ready to face. This silent insight creates a subtle tension in the room. People may not understand why they feel so vulnerable, but deep down, they sense it. This person sees me, not just the version I want to present. Inside the INFJ, this ability is not a power they intentionally wield, it's simply how their mind works. They live in a constant state of intuition, absorbing emotional cues, reading patterns, and connecting dots instinctively. They don't judge people for their masks. They understand why those masks exist, but that understanding, that gentle awareness, often makes others uncomfortable. People who thrive behind charm, bravado, or emotional armor feel disarmed when an INFJ quietly notices the cracks. The INFJ doesn't have to confront them, question them, or call them out. The simple act of being seen, truly seen, unsettles those who are not used to being understood at a depth deeper than their defenses. This unspoken exposure leads people to behave differently around INFJs. Some become overly defensive, talking too fast, oversharing, or trying to impress. Others pull back, avoid eye contact, or become strangely formal. And some, the ones who fear vulnerability the most, may even grow irritated or intimidated without understanding why. They assume the INFJ is too intense or too serious, when in reality they are reacting to the discomfort of having their emotional facade gently lifted by someone who never asked for the truth but can still feel it. And yet, the INFJ remains soft, calm, and compassionate, which only amplifies this effect. Their quiet presence, paired with their intuitive vision, makes others aware of parts of themselves they've avoided confronting. People feel smaller, not because the INFJ makes them small, but because the INFJ reveals how much they've been hiding. In that silent exposure, there is both fear and possibility. Fear for those who cling to their mask, and possibility for those ready to be seen. Their emotional depth highlights the superficiality in others. INFJs move through the world with a depth that is quiet, steady, and unmistakable. They feel emotions in layers, perceive meaning beneath every interaction, and approach relationships with intention rather than convenience. Their presence carries a seriousness, not heavy, but genuine, that exposes the shallow behaviors, empty conversations, and surface-level performances of those around them. People who rely on small talk, image, and emotional shortcuts often feel strangely inadequate next to an INFJ. It's not because the INFJ demands depth, it's because their natural authenticity makes superficiality instantly visible. Others sense it, even if they can't articulate it. Next to an INFJ, their emotional shortcuts feel flimsy, their facades feel thin, and their inner emptiness becomes harder to ignore. Inside the INFJ, this depth is not a choice or a cultivated skill, it's the lens through which they experience everything. They naturally ask the deeper question, they naturally care about the meaning behind actions, they naturally want to understand the emotional truth beneath words, and this way of being often acts as a mirror for others. Suddenly, people become aware of how performative their interactions have been. They notice how often they hide real emotions behind humor, how often they avoid vulnerability by filling silence with noise, how often they skim the surface because they fear what lies underneath. The INFJ doesn't call them out, they simply are deeper, and that alone exposes the difference. People who aren't used to emotional authenticity can feel unsettled by this contrast. They may accuse the INFJ of being too serious, too intense, or too deep, when the real discomfort comes from seeing their own emotional shallowness reflected back at them. In the presence of someone who feels fear, love, sadness, intuition, and truth at full volume, their half-hearted emotions suddenly feel muted. Their avoidance becomes obvious, their lack of self-awareness becomes undeniable, and this makes them feel smaller, not because the INFJ belittles them, but because the INFJ's emotional resonance illuminates everything they try to keep hidden in the dark. But for those willing to grow, this depth becomes inspiring rather than intimidating. The INFJ becomes the person who invites them to think deeper, feel deeper, and connect more honestly. Yet for those resistant to introspection, the INFJ's presence will always feel like a quiet challenge, a reminder that emotional depth exists and that they haven't yet touched their own. This is why people shrink around INFJs without knowing why. Their superficial layers simply cannot survive next to someone who lives from the soul. They listen with full presence, something many people aren't used to. Most people listen to respond. INFJs listen to understand. Their attention is not scattered, divided, or superficial. It is complete, almost disarming. When someone talks to an INFJ, they feel something rare, a listener who is truly there. No phone checking, no impatience, no rehearsing replies in their head, just presence. And that presence makes people feel seen in a way they're not accustomed to. For some, it's comforting. For others, it's unsettling because when an INFJ listens, they absorb more than the words. They catch the tremble behind a sentence, the shift in tone, the hesitation that reveals a hidden truth. They make people aware of how deeply they're being perceived, and in that awareness, many feel suddenly vulnerable, almost exposed, as if this quiet listener can hear the things they were never brave enough to say out loud. Inside the INFJ, listening is not a passive act. It's a form of emotional mapping. As others speak, the INFJ connects threads. What they say, what they avoid, how they shift, what they emphasize, where their heart trembles. They hear the story under the story. They hear the pain behind the joke, the longing behind the indifference, the fear behind the anger. People feel the weight of this attention, even if they can't explain it. It's rare in a world where conversations are rushed, shallow, or self-centered. Suddenly, being truly listened to can feel overwhelming, even intimidating, because it forces people to confront the authenticity they usually avoid. Some respond by opening up more than they intended. They find themselves telling an INFJ things they've never told anyone. Secrets, regrets, childhood wounds, hidden dreams. They feel safe for a moment, suspended in the INFJ's quiet understanding. But later, that openness can make them feel exposed, too raw. They may pull back, not because the INFJ did anything wrong, but because they're not used to the emotional honesty that full presence demands. Others, especially those who fear intimacy, feel uncomfortable from the start. They sense that the INFJ's listening is too sharp, too accurate, too penetrating. like a mirror reflecting their truth back at them. And this is where the shrinking happens. People who are used to being half heard don't know how to handle being fully seen. They mistake the INFJ's presence for judgment, even though it's actually compassion. They misinterpret the depth of listening as emotional intensity when it's simply sincerity. But the effect remains the same. In the presence of an INFJ's full attention, people suddenly become aware of their own noise, distractions, and emotional evasion. The INFJ doesn't make them feel small. The contrast between true presence and superficial listening does. Their calm confidence unsettles people who rely on dominance or noise. INFJs carry a steady, grounded confidence that doesn't need volume, bravado, or theatrics to be felt. It's a quiet self-assurance, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, and this subtle strength deeply unsettles people who rely on dominance, intimidation, or noise to feel powerful. Loud personalities expect resistance, competition, or submission. Instead, they're met with an INFJ's calm gaze, measured responses, and unshaken energy. That calmness disarms them. It removes the arena where they're used to performing. It exposes the fragility underneath their noise. And nothing rattles someone who depends on control more than realizing their usual tactics simply don't work on an INFJ. The INFJ doesn't shrink, doesn't react, doesn't escalate. They just are. And that quiet certainty is more powerful than any loud display. Inside the INFJ, this confidence is not arrogance, it's clarity. They understand who they are, what they value, and what they refuse to engage in. They don't fight for attention because they don't need it. They don't assert dominance because they find it pointless. They don't get swept into emotional storms because they've learned the cost of allowing someone else to dictate their state of mind. So when someone tries to overpower them through volume, ego, or aggression, the INFJ simply doesn't enter the arena. They remain still. They remain centered. They remain untouched. And this lack of reaction exposes something uncomfortable. The other person's power only existed as long as others reacted to it. For people who rely on loudness to feel strong, the INFJ's silence becomes a mirror. It reflects their insecurity, their unspoken fears, their need for validation. They feel smaller because for the first time, their force isn't met with fear, their dominance isn't met with submission, their noise isn't met with equal volume. Instead, it dissolves in the INFJ's calm presence. The INFJ's quiet confidence says, without words, I don't need to match your energy to stand my ground. And that is the kind of strength, ego-driven, people are never prepared for. This is why INFJs often unsettle people in positions of authority, people who thrive on confrontation or people who equate loudness with leadership. The INFJ's calmness reveals how unnecessary their dominance truly is. It shows that true strength doesn't need to shout. It can whisper and still be heard. It can stand still and still be powerful. It can remain soft and still be unshakable. And in that moment, the people who rely on noise feel their own power shrink, not because the INFJ takes anything from them, but because the INFJ reveals, simply by existing, that real power doesn't need noise. It only needs certainty. They sense hidden motives, making manipulation nearly impossible. INFJs move through the world with an intuition so sharp it feels almost supernatural to the people who experience it. They don't just hear what someone says, they read the intention behind the words, the emotional temperature of the room, the silent motivations hiding underneath polite behavior. When someone tries to manipulate them, even subtly, the INFJ senses it instantly. A shift in tone, an unusual pause, an overly rehearsed compliment, a mismatched emotion, these tiny cues reveal everything. The INFJ may not react right away, but internally, they've already seen through the veneer. And this ability to detect hidden motives makes them nearly impossible to control, deceive, or emotionally sway. People who rely on manipulation feel their strategies fall apart before they even begin. And that quiet resistance makes them feel smaller, exposed, and strangely powerless. Inside the INFJ's mind, the process is automatic. They connect emotional patterns, past behavior, and intuitive impressions with remarkable speed. They understand when praise is genuine and when it's a tool. They sense when someone is withholding truth, fishing for information, or attempting to provoke a reaction. And while most people may ignore or justify these subtle red flags, INFJs treat them as data, signals of deeper intentions. This sensitivity isn't born from paranoia, it's born from experience. INFJs have learned, often painfully, that people aren't always what they present. So they listen to the gut feeling others dismiss, and that intuition becomes their protection. Manipulators find INFJs deeply frustrating. Their usual tactics, guilt-tripping, emotional pressure, charm, passive aggression, slide off the INFJ like water off glass. INFJs may not confront immediately, they often prefer to observe silently, gathering information, watching patterns repeat. But once the truth becomes clear, they detach emotionally long before the other person realizes they've been discovered. The manipulator senses the shift but doesn't understand it. They just feel their influence fading, their grip loosening, their power dissolving. And nothing bruises a manipulator's ego more than realizing someone saw through them without ever being fooled. This ability to sense hidden motives creates an invisible boundary around the INFJ. People with genuine intentions feel safe, understood, and welcomed, but those with ulterior motives feel exposed and unsettled. They cannot hide their true agenda because the INFJ's intuition illuminates it instantly. And this is why people feel smaller around INFJs. Their shadows don't stay hidden, their tactics don't go unnoticed, their emotional games don't work. The INFJ doesn't just stay out of the web, they see the web being woven before a single thread is laid. Their empathy reflects people's true intentions back at them. INFJs possess a form of empathy that goes far beyond simply understanding how someone feels. They absorb emotional states, read emotional inconsistencies, and reflect back the truth others try to hide. When someone stands before an INFJ, they don't just encounter kindness, they encounter an emotional mirror. This mirror doesn't judge, but it reveals. It reflects subtle intentions, unspoken desires, buried frustrations, and even hidden agendas. People suddenly become aware of their own emotional tone, their own motives, their own contradictions, and for many, this is deeply uncomfortable. Those who operate with mixed intentions or performative sincerity feel exposed, as if the INFJ's presence quietly says, "I see you," even in the places you avoid seeing yourself. Inside the INFJ, this reflective empathy isn't an act. It's instinctual. They naturally tune into the emotional wavelength of others, often feeling it before the other person acknowledges it. If someone approaches with honesty, warmth, or vulnerability, the INFJ reflects it back with even greater depth. But if someone approaches with manipulation, insecurity, or hidden resentment, the INFJ reflects the subtle tension they feel, and that reflection forces people to recognize aspects of themselves they usually bury under distractions or denial. People who lack emotional honesty struggle with this because the INFJ doesn't allow them to overlook their own motives. They can't hide behind charm. They can't disguise their insecurity. They can't pretend their intentions are pure when the INFJ's presence highlights the emotional truth vibrating beneath their words. This mirroring effect often leaves people unsettled without knowing why. They talk to an INFJ and then walk away feeling strangely confronted, not by the INFJ, but by themselves. Suddenly, they notice how defensive they sounded, how insincere their compliments were, how forced their confidence felt. The INFJ never points these things out, but their empathetic resonance makes others feel the emotional weight of their own behavior. People who live superficially feel hollow in comparison. People who manipulate feel transparent. People who pretend feel exposed. And none of this is because the INFJ tries to shrink them. It's because their own truth becomes impossible to ignore in the INFJ's presence. For the rare few who embrace authenticity, the INFJ's empathy becomes a sanctuary, a space where they feel understood, grounded, and mirrored in the best way. But for those who fear their own truth, the INFJ becomes a quiet threat, a reminder that emotional intentions are never as hidden as people believe. And this is why people feel smaller around INFJs. Their empathy reflects back who you truly are, not who you pretend to be. Their authenticity exposes the pretenses others hide behind. INFJs move through the world with a sincerity that is rare, disarming, and uncomfortably honest. They don't posture, exaggerate, or perform to win approval. They don't shapeshift to fit expectations. They don't hide behind flashy behavior, inflated confidence, or social masks. And because their authenticity is so natural, it quietly reveals the artificial layers in the people around them. Someone who relies on pretense suddenly feels their facade thinning. Someone who hides behind humor, charm, or bravado feels strangely transparent. Someone who exaggerates their life to appear impressive becomes aware of how unnecessary it is. The INFJ doesn't expose these masks intentionally, but their genuine presence makes everything inauthentic stand out like a crack under bright light. People feel smaller, not because the INFJ judges them, but because their own pretenses can't survive in the presence of someone who simply refuses to wear one. Inside the INFJ, this authenticity comes from introspection, self-awareness, and a refusal to lie to themselves. INFJs know who they are and who they are not. They've examined their wounds, their strengths, and their shadows. They've spent years refining their values, their emotional boundaries, and their truth. So when they show up in a room, they show up fully themselves, without distortion, and this grounded presence forces others to confront the parts of themselves they keep hidden. People who have built identities around appearance rather than substance feel the contrast immediately. They may become defensive, irritated, or overly performative, trying to compensate for the quiet discomfort rising within them. But the tension isn't caused by the INFJ. It's caused by a sudden awareness of how much energy they spend maintaining an image. Pretenders often misinterpret this dynamic. They think the INFJ is judging them, when in reality, the INFJ is simply being real. The discomfort they feel is internal, a reaction to seeing their own pretense reflected back at them. And because INFJs see through the performance and choose not to engage in it, people who rely on image feel like they're speaking into a void. Their usual strategies, attention-seeking, exaggeration, emotional dramatics, fail to produce the desired reaction. The INFJ's authenticity dissolves the illusion, leaving them face to face with their own insecurity. For people who value truth, the INFJ becomes a refreshing presence, grounding, inspiring, and profoundly human. But for those who fear being seen for who they really are, the INFJ becomes a silent threat to their constructed identity. Their authenticity doesn't just expose pretense, it challenges it. And in that challenge, many feel smaller, not because the INFJ dims their light, but because the INFJ's genuine flame makes superficiality fade into the background. Their quiet strength makes people confront parts of themselves they normally avoid. INFJs carry a form of strength that is subtle but undeniable, a strength that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand attention, and doesn't need validation. It lives in their stillness, their steady gaze, their controlled emotions, and their deep understanding of human nature. This quiet strength has an unexpected effect on others. It brings their avoided truths to the surface. People who have spent years hiding from their insecurities, unresolved wounds, or unexamined motives suddenly feel them rise when standing in the presence of an INFJ. It's as if the INFJ's inner stability exposes the instability others try so hard to hide. Their grounded energy becomes a silent mirror, reflecting back the parts of people they usually bury beneath distraction, noise, performance, or denial. And because the INFJ never attacks, never judges, never demands, the confrontation feels internal, inevitable, and deeply uncomfortable. Inside the INFJ, this strength comes from years of emotional endurance, introspection, and silent growth. They've survived chaos without becoming chaotic. They've walked through pain without becoming destructive. They've learned to regulate themselves, understand themselves, and rebuild themselves quietly. So when they show up in front of people who avoid inner work, the contrast is stark. Their calmness exposes unrest. Their integrity exposes inconsistency. Their emotional maturity exposes avoidance. And people feel the difference, not through words, but through energy. It's the quiet realization that the INFJ has done the work they themselves have been postponing, and that realization shrinks them, not because the INFJ intends it, but because truth naturally reveals what has been ignored. Some people respond with respect, admiration, or a desire to grow. They feel inspired by the INFJ's peaceful strength. But others respond with discomfort or defensiveness. They may try to diminish the INFJ, mock their depth, or accuse them of being too sensitive, all attempts to avoid looking inward. Yet, none of it works because the INFJ's presence is too steady to be shaken by projection. The INFJ doesn't push people to confront their truth, people confront it automatically because the INFJ's authenticity leaves no room for emotional shortcuts or self-deception. This is why people feel smaller around INFJs, not because INFJs make them feel inferior, but because their quiet strength awakens a truth people have been running from. It reminds them of the courage they haven't yet claimed, the healing they haven't yet done, and the parts of themselves they still fear facing. The INFJ doesn't dim their light to make others comfortable. Their light simply exists, and its glow reveals everything in the room, including what others try hardest to hide. In the end, people don't feel smaller around INFJs because INFJs are intimidating. They feel smaller because an INFJ's presence brings them face to face with truths they've avoided. The depth, authenticity, intuition, empathy, and quiet strength of an INFJ reveal layers in others they rarely acknowledge. And instead of admitting this, people hide behind excuses. Too intense, too deep, too sensitive. But the truth is simpler. An INFJ doesn't shrink anyone. They simply shine a light on what others keep in the dark. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. Let me leave you with one question only the self-awares can answer. Have you ever noticed people change around you, not because of who you are, but because of what you reflect back to them? If you stayed until the end, comment, "I reflect truth. So I know you're one of the rare minds who understands the power behind quiet depth." And if you're new here, subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind, where your intuition, silence, and inner strength are finally understood.